My mother's obsession with pure natural living was a slow-acting toxicity that upended our family. I spent my previous life sacrificing everything to save her, only for her to use her final breath to convince the internet I had ruined her life. Reborn to the exact day her fanatical organic crusade began. I made a new vow: if they all want to suffer in the name of purity, I will gladly let them walk their own path to ruin. Eleanor, my mother, slammed her palm flat against the polished oak dining table, the sharp crack making everyone in the room flinch. Natural is the only way. Anything with artificial preservatives, any synthetic chemicals, it is harmful. It is literal poison, engineered by big pharma and greedy corporations to ruin us, she shouted, her eyes wide with a terrifying, absolute conviction. From now on we eat organic. We use zero additive products. Do you all understand me? Since crossing into her late 60s, my mother had become increasingly paranoid. It started with harmless Facebook groups, and escalated into full-blown naturopathic fanaticism. She began avoiding approved medications like the plague, insisting that any pill prescribed by a doctor was just a concentrated dose of harmful substances, designed to keep the population sick. In my past life, she had tried to implement this extreme lifestyle alone, but eventually demanded the entire household join her cult of absolute purity. Sitting across from her were my sister-in-law Sarah and her twin daughters, Lily and Chloe. Sarah bit her lower lip, glancing at me with a pain-desperate expression, silently pleading for me to intervene. I looked right past her, picking at my cuticles. In my previous life, that exact look of helpless distress from Sarah was what had spurred me into action. I had played the hero. I had argued with my mother for hours, slamming medical journals and safety guidelines on this very table. The dose makes the substance, Mom, I had argued, exhausted. Trace preservatives are industry standards meant to prevent spoilage, not cause severe health issues. Through my aggressive intervention, her authoritarian pure natural regime failed to take root in our house. My reward: tragedy. When she was diagnosed with a severe late-stage illness at 65, I was the one who dragged her to specialist appointments at the Mayo Clinic. I paid for her procedures out of my own pocket, and held her down when she tried to rip her IVs out. I fought relentlessly for her life, but the condition was too aggressive. Yet, in her final days on hospice care, she didn't thank me. Instead, she propped up her iPad, went live on TikTok and Facebook, and gasped out a damning confession to thousands of viewers. My daughter. She harmed me my whole life. She fed me chemical sludge. The treatments, she's letting them pump me full of toxins to bring my end faster, because she genuinely believed that her condition was the result of a lifetime of accumulating food additives and synthetic lotions. She viewed my life-saving medical care as a deliberate effort to harm her. That viral video destroyed my life. The internet outrage was swift and merciless. I begged my family to clear my name. But Sarah, standing on the porch of her new suburban home, looked at me with cold indifference. I have my own life and career now, Caroline. I can't afford to be dragged into your toxic PR nightmare. I drove through a torrential downpour to find Lily, the niece I had practically raised and tutored through college. I slipped on the wet concrete of her sorority house steps, bruising my knees, only for her to stare down at me with disgust. You have the nerve to show your face here. You brought an end to Grandma with those chemicals. Are you trying to ruin our lives too? Eventually, my address was leaked online. Strangers sent severe harassment to my inbox. My high-paying role at a Chicago PR firm was terminated to avoid negative associations. I became an outcast, forced to move into a damp roach-infested studio apartment on the south side. The final straw came when the sleazy guy across the hall cornered me near the stairwell. $50 for a night. You doing it or what? He sneered, blowing cheap cigarette smoke in my face. When I shouted at him to get away, he laughed. A psycho who harmed her own mother. You should be grateful. I'm giving you a chance to make rent. Driven into absolute despair, I took a heavy dose of sleeping pills in the dark. My disappearance barely made a ripple. Sarah and the twins told everyone I had departed out of guilt to apologize to my mother in the afterlife. And then they happily divided my estate and life insurance among themselves, but now, I was back. Reborn to the very moment it all started. If they wanted to live terribly, I would ensure they got exactly what they asked for. Only when their lives were thoroughly ruined would my soul find peace. I looked up, meeting my mother's crazed eyes, and smiled warmly. "Mom, I completely agree with you," I said, my voice ringing with supportive enthusiasm. The pollution and corporate greed in this country are out of control. If it isn't completely natural, we simply can't trust it. Seeing my unexpected support, my mother's chest puffed up with pride. She slammed her hand on the table again. "Exactly, starting today, it is a new rule." To prove my absolute devotion to my mother's new lifestyle, I immediately marched into the living room and threw a brand new tube of expensive pediatrician recommended cortisone eczema cream into the trash. Sarah had just asked me to pick it up from the pharmacy on my way home from work because Lily had developed a severe weeping allergic rash on her cheeks. I turned to Sarah, placing a hand over my heart in mock sincerity. "Mom is so right. I can't believe I didn't see it before. This stuff is completely harmful. How could we possibly put this chemical formula on a child's delicate skin? I was so thoughtless." Sarah shot me a look of pure betrayal and resentment. I ignored her completely, fishing the cardboard packaging out of the trash to present it to my mother. "Look at this ingredient list. Mom, parabens, synthetic ingredients, petroleum byproducts. It's basically industrial waste." My mother gasped as if she had just found a hazardous item in the living room. "Oh my God, did Lily already put this on?" "Quickly, Mom," I urged, my voice laced with manufactured panic. "There's raw garlic and unpasteurized apple cider vinegar in the pantry. Garlic is nature's cleanser, and vinegar neutralizes synthetic bacteria. We have to treat Lily's skin naturally." Though Lily and Chloe were twins, my mother harbored an intense, almost pathological favoritism for the older twin, Lily. During Sarah's pregnancy, an early ultrasound tech had mistakenly suggested it was a boy and a girl. My mother had been ecstatic at the thought of a grandson to carry on the family name. When Chloe was born instead, my mother couldn't hide her bitter disappointment. In my past life, to make up for this blatant inequality, I had spent hours comforting Chloe, buying them matching gifts, and loving them equally. But my desperate attempts to foster sisterly love had only nurtured two ungrateful backstabbers, who turned on me the second it became convenient. This time, I was done playing the benevolent aunt. I was going to let the unpleasantness of their own environment rot them from the inside out. Within seconds, my mother came rushing back from the kitchen, wielding a bowl of crushed raw garlic heavily soaked in acidic apple cider vinegar. Without a moment's hesitation, she began scrubbing the caustic mixture directly into the open, weeping irritation on Lily's face. The pungent, eye-watering stench of garlic and vinegar filled the room. Lily let out a sharp cry as the acidic juice burned her raw skin. The rash instantly flared into a swollen, angry crimson, looking exponentially worse than before. If my mother kept up this natural remedy, Lily's face was guaranteed to suffer severe irritation and skin damage. Watching my mother aggressively scrub the crying child, I casually picked up the discarded tube of cortisone cream and moved toward the kitchen trash can. Sarah, her face pale with a mix of worry and thriftiness, stepped forward. "Caroline, wait, don't throw it away. It costs $30. It is brand new. Maybe we can still use it for something else." I immediately pulled Chloe, who was watching her sister's ordeal with wide, frightened eyes, into my arms. I glared at Sarah with righteous indignation. "Sarah, I am appalled at you," I scolded loudly, making sure my mother heard every word over Lily's crying. "Did you not just hear what Mom said? These synthetic ingredients are unsafe. Why is it that when something is deemed too harmful for Lily, your first instinct is to save it for Chloe? Does she not matter?" I knew exactly what Sarah meant. She was just being cheap and didn't want the money wasted. But I controlled the narrative now. Sarah stammered, her face turning bright red. I didn't mean that. But it was too late. Chloe had already buried her face into my sweater, her tiny shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Years of enduring her grandmother's blatant favoritism had already made her hypersensitive. Being the neglected twin was painful enough without being told her mother wanted to test rejected products on her. I stroked Chloe's hair gently, smiling over her head. The seeds of resentment had been planted. Now, I just had to wait for them to sprout. By the time dinner rolled around, the dining table looked like a Depression-era rationing experiment. There were bowls of boiled lentils, steamed kale, and a watery vegetable broth. My mother hadn't even dared to use olive oil or butter. Convinced that all store-bought fats were harmful compounds, I didn't care. I viewed it as a temporary detox cleanse, and I fully intended to order a massive DoorDash feast of sushi and Wagyu beef the second I was back in my own apartment. But Lily, whose face was still a puffy, garlicky, red mess, was not having it. She banged her silverware against the heavy ceramic plates, splashing murky vegetable broth across the placemats. "I want chicken nuggets. I want French fries," she yelled, kicking the table legs. In the past, I would have immediately disciplined her, refusing to tolerate such bratty behavior. But now, not my kid. Not my problem. Let the chaos reign. "Oh, Lily, sweetheart," I sighed, adopting a tone of exaggerated sorrow. "The chicken in the supermarkets here in the suburbs, they're genetically modified. They pump them so full of synthetic growth additives that they grow weird deformities. It's scary. We can't let you eat that. Maybe next month Grandma can drive out to an Amish farm and catch a wild, organic chicken for you." My mother, horrified by my description of unnatural chickens, quickly tried to stroke Lily's hair to comfort her. Lily violently twisted away, batting my mother's hand away, and actually spitting on the floor in protest. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice tight. "Caroline, eating a little fast food once in a while isn't going to harm them. Mom, I already bought the groceries for the week. Are we really just going to throw it all in the garbage?" My mother hesitated. Both Lily and Chloe looked up at her with large, hungry, pleading eyes. I leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for the table to hear, "Mom, our adult bodies might be able to handle the microplastics and heavy metals, but their little immune systems." I let the sentence hang. My mother's eyes widened in dismay. She understood perfectly. Sarah tried to argue, shooting desperate, frantic glances at her crying daughters. Before the tantrum could escalate further, I chimed in with a bright idea. "Lily, Chloe, how about you girls take a few days off school? Grandma can take you to the old family farm up in the Appalachian foothills for a little vacation." The mention of skipping school acted like a magic spell. Both girls instantly stopped crying and began cheering. What did a couple of elementary schoolers care about diets when they could get out of math class? Education. I was teaching them right now that momentary pleasure always trumped hard work. I set down my fork and turned to my mother with intense seriousness. "Mom, maybe it's best if they just transferred to the rural county school permanently. Have you seen the pollution reports for the city? Even breathing the air here is an unhealthy hazard." I pulled out my phone, opening a weather app, and conveniently pointing to a red poor air quality warning. My mother stared at the screen, her paranoia kicking into overdrive. Sarah, who used to manipulate my mother into fighting her battles, was suddenly paralyzed. The weapon she used to wield had turned against her. She looked at me, opening her mouth to protest, but I reached out and grabbed her hands with feigned sisterly affection. "Sarah, I know it is a big change, but Mom would never do anything to harm you or the kids, right? Out in the country, the water is from a deep well. The air is pristine. The food is grown in untouched soil. People in the city pay thousands to go to off-grid wellness retreats. We have a family property sitting empty. It's a shame not to utilize it for the girls' health." Sarah wrung her hands, her face a portrait of anxiety. But what about my job at the real estate agency? I can't just leave." I let my smile drop, replaced by a look of cold, pious judgment. "My brother Michael is watching you from above, Sarah," I said softly, delivering the final blow. "If you fail to protect his daughters from this unhealthy environment just so you can sell a few suburban split levels. What kind of mother are you?" That was the exact phrase she used to chain me to this family in my past life. Your brother is watching from above, Caroline. How can you abandon his kids to take a promotion in New York? Because of that guilt, I had passed up massive career opportunities, staying behind to practically raise her children, while she climbed the corporate ladder, eventually marrying a wealthy executive, and living happily ever after while I suffered in ruin. Hearing her own weaponized guilt turned against her, Sarah shrunk back in her chair, defeated. My mother, who had been pondering the logistics, heard my invocation of her beloved, late son, and slammed her hand on the table again. It is decided. We pack tonight. We move to the country. Just like that. Sarah's lucrative career, and the niece's access to top-tier suburban education, were severed at the root. But I was just getting started. Fueled by my mother's frenzied paranoia, the transfer paperwork for Lily and Chloe was rushed through in a matter of days. By the end of the week, the entire family had packed up and relocated to the dilapidated, isolated farmhouse in the rural countryside. A few weeks later, I was lounging on the plush velvet sofa in my city apartment, a glass of expensive Pinot Noir in hand. My phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from my cousin, who lived a few towns over from the farm, and served as my personal informant. Caroline, you will not believe the chaos your mother is causing up here, she said, practically breathless with gossip, giving me a huge thumbs up. I casually cracked open a jar of imported macadamia nuts and settled in for the show. According to my cousin, the first few days at the farm had been idyllic. My mother loved the fresh air. They bought vegetables directly from roadside stands and purchased live poultry to process themselves. But the honeymoon phase didn't last. Within a week, my mother was banned from the local farmer's market. She had marched up to a vendor and demanded, "Why are your apples so perfectly round? You used chemicals, didn't you? How dare you sell this poison to people?" The local farmer, a gruff man who had worked the land for 40 years, stared at her like she was crazy. "Lady, if we don't treat for the blight, the whole orchard rots. We use standard, approved agricultural practices." My mother put her hands on her hips and shouted at the top of her lungs, "I don't care about your blight. You're ruining the earth. You call this organic? You're a villain." She caused such a scene that security had to escort her out. But not before she loudly warned every passing customer that they were buying harmful food. The locals wrote her off as an unhinged city slicker, but my mother couldn't let it go. Feeling she was on a righteous mission to save humanity, she sneaked out in the dead of night and trespassed onto a community-funded agricultural co-op. Believing the crops were tainted, she spent hours uprooting hundreds of heirloom tomato plants and snapping the stems of juvenile corn stalks, proudly declaring to the empty fields that she was cleansing the earth. The next morning, the damage was discovered. The farmers who relied on those crops for their winter income were furious. A group of angry locals, complete with pickup trucks and hunting equipment in their vehicle racks, showed up at the farmhouse. Sarah had been forced to empty her entire emergency savings account to pay for the destroyed crops. Apologizing profusely while my mother threw a tantrum on the porch, shouting that they were all agents of Big Pharma, the locals threatened to call the county sheriff if they ever saw her near their land again. Now, my mother was the most disliked woman in the Tri-County area. They were entirely socially isolated. Smiling into my phone, I ended the FaceTime call. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the rich complex flavors, and typed out a quick text message to my mother. "Mom, I heard what happened. It just proves you can trust anyone. Not even the country folk. If you really want 100% pure, untainted food, I think you need to start tilling the earth and growing it yourself. What do you think?" Thanks to my little suggestion, the next time I used a long weekend to drive out and visit the farmhouse, I barely recognized Sarah. My mother had actually leased 2 acres of rocky, stubborn soil behind the property, determined to create a completely self-sufficient, chemical-free utopia. And because my mother believed manual labor was the ultimate cleanser, Sarah had been forced into grueling agricultural work. In my previous life, Sarah took meticulous care of herself. She was a woman who never missed her monthly cosmetic peels or beauty treatments, always keeping her skin smooth, pale, and youthful. Now, Her skin was sun-damaged, rough, and weathered into an uneven brown. Her blonde highlights had grown out into mousy roots, and her hair looked dry and brittle, like dead straw. It was obvious. My mother had thrown away all her expensive sunscreens, moisturizers, and hair serums, declaring them all toxic synthetic sludge. Looking at Sarah now, struggling in mud-stained overalls, I couldn't help but feel a subtle thrill. With her sun-damaged skin and exhausted posture, she would have a hard time catching the eye of a wealthy corporate executive. This time around, when she saw my pristine SUV pull into the gravel driveway, Sarah practically threw down her hoe and sprinted toward me, looking at me like I was a rescuing angel. "Caroline, thank goodness you're here," she pleaded, wiping a streak of dirt off her forehead. "You have to talk to your mother. We need to move back to the city, or at least a suburb. I can't take this anymore. The country life, it is just not working." If this were my past life, seeing her look so desperate and exhausted would have broken my heart. I would have instantly marched into the house, argued with my mother, and arranged for moving trucks the very next day. But this time, I casually sidestepped her frantic hands, brushing a speck of imaginary dust off my tailored cashmere coat. "Sarah, I think you're being incredibly ungrateful," I said, my voice cool and detached. "You get to live out here in this pristine, natural environment, enjoying the fruits of the earth, while I'm stuck suffering in the concrete jungle, breathing in smog and stress." Leaving her standing by the car astonished, I walked up the porch steps and into the house. I found my mother in the rustic kitchen, aggressively chopping what looked like wild dandelions. Before she could start lecturing me about city toxins, I launched my preemptive strike. "Mom, I've made a decision," I announced, dropping my designer tote bag onto a wooden chair. "I'm quitting my job. I'm moving back here to live with you guys permanently. The city is just too unhealthy. Everything is contaminated." I sighed dramatically, collapsing onto the worn-out sofa, throwing an arm over my eyes to perfectly mimic a burned-out professional, giving up on life. Besides, Michael's life insurance payout and his military survivor benefits are more than enough to support us all. I'm just going to lie back and let the country air refresh me. Hearing my voice, Lily and Chloe came running out of the hallway, their faces lighting up. "Aunt Caroline is moving in. Yay! Aunt Caroline can take us into town to buy toys." But Sarah, who had just walked through the front door, let out a sharp cry. "Absolutely not," she shouted, her exhaustion replaced by sheer panic. "That money Michael left that money to provide for his children. You can't just quit your job and live off his survivor benefits." My mother, immediately protective of her son's legacy, eyed me with sudden suspicion. "Caroline, what exactly are you talking about? You're giving up your career to live off Michael's money." I coughed weakly, pressing a hand to my chest as if the mere thought of working was giving me stress. "Well, Sarah was just telling me how amazing it is here, and how she wishes I could enjoy it. Since I'll be moving in, we can all just share the resources. We're a family, right? We'll all just relax and live comfortably off the fund." My mother shot a sharp glare at Sarah. "You know exactly what the financial situation is here, Sarah," she hissed. "With 2 growing girls to feed, and the farm expenses, Michael's money isn't some endless lottery prize." Sarah immediately went on the defensive. "And the girls will need that money for college tuition. We can't have Caroline draining it." I let a single tear roll down my cheek, looking at my mother with wounded betrayal. "Sarah makes it sound like I'm trying to steal from you. She thinks I'm living like a queen in the city, while she works the fields. But she doesn't realize how much the city is wearing my body down." I stood up, grabbing my tote bag and sniffing pitifully. "If you both feel this way, if I'm such a burden to this family, then fine. I'll leave. I won't come back, so you don't have to worry about me living off you." Before they could process my sudden exit, I was out the door and back in my SUV. As I drove down the gravel road, I rolled the windows down, letting the cool breeze wash over me. I could hear the muffled sounds of shouting coming from the farmhouse. Sarah and my mother were arguing fiercely, their voices loud and accusatory, while the twins cried in the background. The family financial support had just closed its doors. Let them fight over the remaining pennies. Let them tear each other apart. I had said it before. No one in that house was going to have a happy life after that dramatic exit. I enjoyed a long stretch of uninterrupted peace in my city apartment. My mother and Sarah were likely too busy resenting each other to bother calling me. However, my twin nieces started texting me frequently. Aunt Caroline, the country school is awesome. In the city I was only ranking 10th in my class. But here, I get the highest grades on every test without even trying. Lily texted, inserting a dozen celebration emojis. Chloe chimed in the group chat a few minutes later. And Grandma doesn't make us go to extra tutoring or piano lessons anymore. It is so fun here. We just play in the woods all afternoon. Through their constant updates and photos, I could see exactly what was happening. I smiled to myself, typing back a sweet reply. That is wonderful, girls. You should thank Grandma for taking you to such a stress-free environment. You deserve a break. They thought they were winning. They thought getting straight A's at an underfunded rural county school, with practically zero academic standards, meant they were geniuses. They were thrilled to be free of the grueling extracurriculars and tutoring sessions I used to pay for in the city. The gap in educational resources between a top-tier suburban district and a struggling rural one was an absolute chasm. By the time they reached high school and had to compete on a national level for college admissions, the reality of their stress-free education would hit them like a freight train. In my past life, I had poured my heart, soul, and bank account into getting those girls into prestigious universities. When Chloe struggled with academics, I hired private tutors and paid tens of thousands for her to attend elite art camps, so she could get in on a portfolio scholarship. I made sure both of them shined like polished diamonds on their respective campuses, and I foolishly believed that higher education would instill them with basic logic and critical thinking. Yet, when the internet accused me of harming my mother, those same college-educated nieces joined the online crowd, publicly condemning me on social media to protect their own standing. If they were going to be ungrateful regardless of the education I provided, then this time, they didn't need to go to college at all. Let them revel in their easy A's now. The real world would deal with them later. The deceptive tranquility was shattered late one Tuesday night, when my phone lit up with a frantic call from Sarah. Caroline, you have to help me. Lily's running a high fever. But your mom won't let me take her to the urgent care. What do I do? She shouted into the receiver, her voice breaking with panic. I moved the phone a few inches away from my ear, casually smoothing a cool hydrating sheet mask over my face. Calm down, Sarah. What exactly did Mom say? I already knew the answer. My mother's naturopathic fanaticism dictated that all illness was merely the body cleansing, and that introducing medical drugs would only drive impurities deeper into the organs. To her, a fever wasn't a symptom of an infection. It was the natural heat purging the synthetic impurities. She locked the front door and took the car keys. Sarah sobbed. She keeps saying this is just a natural purge. She wrapped Lily in heavy wool blankets and said she needs to sweat the impurities out. Caroline, Lily is burning up. She is weak. You have to drive up here and take us to the doctor. Sarah, I'm 3 hours away, I replied mildly, checking my cuticles. If it is an emergency, just call medical services. They'll dispatch an ambulance. I hung up before she could argue, and immediately dialed my mother's cell phone. Mom, I said, pitching my voice to sound concerned but loyal. Sarah just called me in a panic. She wants me to drive up there and take Lily to the hospital for treatment. What's going on? My mother immediately flew into a defensive rage. Don't you listen to a word that hysterical woman says. This is exactly what the body is supposed to do. Lily is finally expelling all the synthetic ingredients and artificial food dyes she ate in the city. But Mom, Sarah seemed really scared. I know what I'm doing, my mother snapped. If you take her to those corporate doctors, they'll pump her full of unnatural shots and ruin her immune system forever. I'm keeping her wrapped up. A good sweat will reset her by morning. In my previous life, if anyone in the family even coughed, I was the one who drove them to the best clinic, handled the copays, and sat in the waiting room for hours. My reward was constant complaints. My mother complained the waiting room was too cold. Sarah complained the doctors were rude. And ultimately, my mother used my medical diligence as proof that I was harming her with treatments. This time, I was washing my hands of it entirely. I wasn't going to be the family's medical manager anymore. Around 2 a.m., my mother posted an update on her social media page. My beautiful granddaughter has finally completed her natural purge. Fever has broken. A powerful reminder to all parents: never let them inject your children with synthetic substances. Trust the body. Attached was a photo of Lily. The poor girl looked worn out. Her face was flushed a deep scarlet. Her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, wrapped tightly in 3 thick wool blankets. She looked barely conscious, but my mother felt victorious. She had handled the fever naturally. It wasn't until the following afternoon that they realized the true cost of their choice. The prolonged high fever had caused nerve complications. Lily was now completely deaf in her left ear. I learned about the outcome from Chloe. When I arrived home from work on Friday evening, I found a small shivering figure sitting on the floor mat outside my apartment door. Chloe looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, and burst into tears before I could even say a word. I unlocked the door, brought her inside, and handed her a warm cup of herbal tea before gently asking what happened. "Aunt Caroline," she hiccuped, clutching the mug. "Why is Lily deaf now? Grandma keeps shouting that it is my fault." I paused. "Why would she say it is your fault, sweetie? Grandma said I have bad energy. She said I brought ill fortune to the family by not being a boy, and now my energy made Lily sick. But Grandma was the one who wouldn't let Mommy take Lily to the doctor." I looked at the 12-year-old girl in front of me. She knew perfectly well that if someone was sick, they needed a doctor. She possessed basic common sense now. So why, 10 years later, when she was 22 and college educated, did she pretend not to know? Why did she join the internet crowd and agree that I had harmed her grandmother by taking her to an oncologist? I pushed the thoughts away. Now was not the time for interrogation. Now was the time to become her absolute favorite person in the world. I let Chloe stay in my apartment for a full week. I spoiled her completely. I ordered her favorite artisan pizzas, bought gourmet pastries from downtown bakeries, and stocked the fridge with imported fruits. One evening, while enjoying a bowl of fresh dark red cherries, Chloe looked at me with adoration. "Aunt Caroline, I haven't had cherries in forever. Grandma says all store-bought fruit is covered in chemicals, so we aren't allowed to eat it. And Mommy says she doesn't have any money to buy nice things anyway." I smiled, softly stroking her hair, sharing a quiet truth with her. "Well, Chloe, that is why you need to focus on making your own money as soon as possible. When you have your own money, no one can tell you what to eat or what to buy. You can have anything you want." I took her shopping. I bought her a designer jacket and took her to a high-end salon for a stylish haircut. I even bought her a beginner's makeup kit and taught her how to apply lip gloss and blush. When it was time for bed, she refused to wash her face, desperate to keep the makeup on. Living with my mother, the girls weren't even allowed basic moisturizer. My mother just used raw homegrown aloe vera on their faces. As a result, Chloe's once delicate skin was already showing signs of windburn and harsh rural exposure. On the final night, Chloe looked up at me from the guest bed, her eyes shining with hopeful expectation. "Aunt Caroline, do I really have to go back? Can I just live with you?" I didn't answer directly. I just offered a sad, sympathetic smile and asked a simple question. "You've been here for 7 days, Chloe. Have your mom or grandma called to check on you even once?" The light in her eyes faded instantly, replaced by a heavy realization. "No," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "They know I'm here. They don't check on me. Grandma only cares about Lily even now." She looked back up, her voice firming with determination. "Aunt Caroline, I don't care about school anymore. I just want to get out of there. I want to work and make money. I resent Grandma, and I resent my mom for letting her treat me like this." I smiled silently. In the dim light of the bedroom, the deepest divisions never come from the outside. They come from within, left to simmer until everything falls apart. I don't know exactly what Chloe said to her mother and grandmother, when she finally returned to the farmhouse. Whatever she said to them, it worked. Against my mother's strong objections, Sarah actually agreed to let Chloe leave traditional high school early to enroll in a vocational beauty academy in a neighboring state. But back at the farm, Lily's situation was deteriorating rapidly. The loss of hearing in her left ear profoundly changed her. Once the arrogant favored golden child, she became deeply withdrawn and bitter. She refused to socialize and threw tantrums every morning, shouting that she hated school. Naturally, my mother blamed the school. She was convinced that Lily was being mistreated by closed-minded rural children. One afternoon, my mother marched right into the school administration office, dragging an embarrassed Lily behind her, and started shouting at the bewildered faculty. "How dare you let these kids mistreat my granddaughter?" she yelled, gesturing wildly. "She has hearing loss. She has nerve damage. You are legally obligated to provide her with special accommodations, and instead, you just let her struggle." The young school counselor looked stunned. She quickly flipped through Lily's file, her face turning pale. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. We had no idea Lily had a hearing impairment. This was never put into her medical records when she transferred, and Lily never mentioned it to any of her teachers." The room fell dead silent. It turned out that Lily had been so deeply embarrassed by her partial deafness that she had hidden it from everyone at school. She had struggled to hear lectures, failed to respond when classmates spoke to her from her left side, and faked her way through conversations. Now, her grandmother had just broadcast her private secret to the entire faculty, and whoever else was listening in the hallway. Lily's face burned a dark crimson. She tugged frantically at my mother's sleeve, tears welling in her eyes. "Grandma, please stop. Nobody is picking on me. Just stop." The reality was that no one was picking on Lily. They were just ignoring her. My mother's disruptive behavior toward local farmers, damaging their crops and shouting at them in the market, had made the family unpopular. None of the other children were encouraged to associate with them. Combined with Lily's sudden distant, defensive attitude, she was completely isolated. Leaving the office, my mother walked down the school hallway, thoroughly pleased with herself. "Did you see that, Lily? Grandma put them in their place. They'll treat you properly now. No one picks on my family." She was so blinded by her own self-righteousness that she completely missed the look of absolute resentment Lily shot at her back. My mother had just taken the last fragile shreds of Lily's dignity and publicly discarded them. A few months passed with relative quiet, until a surprising discovery unsettled the family. Sarah, doing laundry one afternoon, noticed red marks on Lily's long-sleeved shirts. Pushing up Lily's sleeves, she discovered that Lily's arms were covered in self-made scratches and deep skin marks. The farmhouse erupted. My mother predictably blamed the school again. She stormed back into the principal's office, threatening to call authorities, the school board, and the local news. "You are letting these kids distress my granddaughter. I demand action. I'll take this entire district to court." The school, worried about legal trouble, launched an internal inquiry. They interviewed teachers, students, and counselors. The source didn't lead to anyone at the rural high school. It led directly to Chloe. At her vocational beauty academy, the school administrator arranged a meeting at the district building, inviting Sarah, my mother, Lily, and a defensive Chloe into a small conference room. The moment the truth came out, that Chloe had been sending Lily harsh, taunting messages, mocking her hearing loss, and sending photos of her own active life, to intentionally upset Lily, Sarah reacted strongly. She reached across the table and swiped Chloe sharply across the face. The sharp sound echoed in the room. "She is your twin sister," Sarah yelled, grabbing Chloe by the shoulders and shaking her. "Look at how upset she is. Why would you do something so mean? Answer me." The staff member stepped in, pulling Sarah back. "Ma'am, calm down. You cannot do that in a school building." "I'll discipline my own daughter however I see fit," Sarah shouted, struggling against the administrator. Chloe, holding her stinging cheek, didn't cry. Instead, she exploded with a decade of bottled-up frustration. "Because you only ever cared about her," Chloe shouted, pointing a finger at Lily. "Everything was always about Lily. Lily gets the new clothes. Lily gets the best food. I had to use her leftover, cast-off items. When Grandma used that sour mixture on her face. You tried to save the real lotion for her, not me. Chloe turned her angry eyes onto my mother. The only person in this family who ever treated me decently was Aunt Caroline, and you two drove her away because you're self-centered and difficult. Sarah opened her mouth, tears streaming down her face, trying to find words to justify years of neglect. Chloe, that is not. We didn't save it. Chloe spat. She grabbed her bag, glaring at the family she resented. I'm leaving. I'm going to stay in the city. At least Aunt Caroline cares about me. And with that, Chloe left the room, leaving her mother crying, and her sister staring blankly at the floor. But Chloe couldn't stay with me. I was no longer in the city. I had finally accepted the major, highly lucrative promotion I had rejected in my past life. I relocated to the corporate headquarters in Seattle, stepping into a senior executive role. I was thriving, entirely focused on building my own career, far away from the ongoing chaos of my family. Since I wasn't available to take her in, Chloe, fresh out of her beauty academy, moved out to Las Vegas. The neglected country girl quickly transformed into a high-end nightlife hostess. She rarely spoke to her mother or grandmother, but she frequently sent me updates on social media. I knew she was dating a wealthy, married developer who paid for her luxury apartment. Looking at her recent photos, it was obvious she had undergone several expensive cosmetic enhancements, adjusting her features and trying new beauty treatments. Dressed in designer labels and dripping with jewelry, she looked vibrant, wealthy, and completely ambitious. If you stood her next to Lily now, you would never guess they were twins. It was the week of winter holidays, and despite my reluctance, I traveled back to the Midwest for a brief family gathering at the farmhouse. It was the first time the entire family had been under one roof in years. Walking into town to pick up supplies, I ran into several locals. Everyone I passed couldn't stop talking about Chloe. She was walking down the dirt roads in designer boots and a luxury coat, her arm linked tightly with mine, radiating an untouchable confidence. Even Sarah, worn down by years of farm labor, looked at Chloe with a mix of wonder and approval. You look so successful, Chloe, she murmured, eyeing the diamond bracelet on Chloe's wrist. The only person who wasn't impressed was my mother. She glared at Chloe from her rocking chair, her lips curled in disapproval. Look at you, covered in cosmetics. All those synthetic substances put into your face. Why did you even bother coming back? You should have stayed wherever you came from. Having delivered her harsh words, my mother turned away and began mixing another batch of raw herbal paste for Lily's ear. Lily sat silently at the table. She looked drained. Her skin, untreated for years and weathered by the sun, was dull with dark patches of dryness. Beside her, Chloe looked like a flawless porcelain doll. I could see the intense envy in Lily's eyes. It was a overwhelming, heavy jealousy. I knew, without a doubt, that Lily's fragile state was about to break. It happened late at night. A sharp scream broke the quiet night. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing with my things? I rushed out of the guest room to find Chloe standing in the hallway. Pointing into the bathroom, Lily was standing in front of the mirror, holding Chloe's expensive cosmetic case. Desperate to look like her stylish twin, Lily had tried to apply Chloe's high-end makeup. But having never learned how, the result was dramatic. Her face was covered in heavy white powder, her lips smeared with a crooked red line that stained her teeth. In the harsh bathroom light, she looked completely disheveled. Put it down. I will stop you cold if you touch my makeup, Chloe shouted. Stepping forward, the two sisters collided. In the sudden struggle, the heavy cosmetic case crashed to the tile floor, shattering hundreds of dollars worth of luxury items into a mess of sparkling powder and broken mirror glass. The noise woke up the rest of the house. Sarah and my mother came running. My mother took one look at the mess and pointed a finger at Chloe. Take your synthetic products and get out. You're trying to contaminate your sister. If you want to use chemicals, do it somewhere else. But Lily didn't seem to hear the argument. She dropped to her knees on the bathroom floor, her hands desperately gathering the broken compacts, trying to salvage the crushed powders and rub them onto her cheeks. She looked up at my mother. her eyes wide and trembling. "Why don't I look like her?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "I listened to you. I didn't use the synthetic things. I worked the dirt. I used the vinegar. So why am I the one who is unrefined? Why am I the one with hearing loss? Why didn't the natural way work? Grandma, why didn't it work?" Her composure had finally broken. She had realized the flaw in the promise. My mother and Sarah stared at her, stunned, completely failing to comprehend the emotional toll they had caused. Chloe sneered, stepping past her sister's trembling figure. "Drop the act," Chloe said to my mother, her voice dripping with resentment. "If I hadn't moved out, I would have actually believed your far-fetched ideas. Pure natural. Zero additives. You're just a closed-minded person trying to feel superior." She kicked a piece of broken compact toward my mother's feet. "You ruined Lily's outlook with your poor advice. But you're not ruining mine. I want my father's legacy money. I know you've been holding it. Hand over the cards." Chloe pushed past my mother, heading straight for the room where the financial documents were kept. Sarah shouted, grabbing Chloe from behind to stop her. My mother grabbed a wooden broom handle and tried to block Chloe's path. I stepped forward, pretending to intervene, but conveniently tripped over the doorframe, staying out of the way. "Don't touch me," Chloe yelled, kicking out to break free. The intense words that flew out of Chloe's mouth were unbelievable. Vegas had clearly taught her how to stand her ground firmly. She grabbed a handful of Sarah's dry hair and pulled back. Breaking free, Chloe grabbed Lily by the collar of her pajamas, pulling her to her feet. "Stop playing the victim, Lily," Chloe shouted directly into her sister's face. "You used to ask Grandma when she was going to leave us so you could get her room. Now you want to play the tragic, faithful granddaughter. You're unbelievable," my mother gasped, clutching her chest. The sheer shock of the revelation, the idea that her favorite grandchild had wished for her to leave, was overwhelming. Her face turned flushed, her eyes strained, and she collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor. Chloe, realizing things had gone too far, grabbed her coat and ran out the front door into the snow. Sarah chased after her, calling into the night. Lily sank back into the corner of the hallway, rocking back and forth, muttering to herself under her breath. I was the only one left standing. I walked slowly over to my mother's rigid, unmoving figure. I looked down at her, feeling a deep, profound sense of calm wash over me. This was the moment I had waited for. I considered just going back to bed and letting her lie on the floor. It would be so simple, but no. A quick exit was far too merciful. She was the architect of my previous life's downfall. She needed to feel the consequences of her choices. I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services. The medical transport arrived with flashing lights, moving through the quiet country darkness. I rode in the back, sitting still as the paramedics worked to stabilize my mother. When the paramedics used emergency equipment on her chest and her body reacted, my hands began to shake slightly. The paramedic noticed and gave me a sympathetic look. "Hang in there, ma'am. We got here fast. She has a chance." I bit the inside of my cheek to stop myself from showing emotion. I lowered my head, feigning anxiety. "Thank you. Please, do what you can." I wasn't shaking out of fear. I was trembling with quiet intensity. At the facility, after a series of scans and emergency procedures, my mother finally opened her eyes. The attending physician pulled me aside, looking deeply concerned. "Your mother suffered a severe neurological episode. Does she have a history of unmanaged blood pressure? Was she prescribed medication that she stopped taking?" I looked down, playing the role of the helpless daughter. "My mother. She has very strong beliefs. She doesn't trust standard medicine. She refuses to take any prescribed care." The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples. "That is very risky. Furthermore, we ran a full panel while she was undergoing tests. We found a very concerning growth in her tissues. We need to do a biopsy immediately, and I strongly recommend preparing for specialized therapy." Before he could finish, a weak sound came from the bed. My mother was frantically reaching toward my arm with her one functional hand. Half of her face was unresponsive, drooping downward. "Harmful," she mumbled, saliva pooling at the corner of her mouth. "Home, take me." Home. I patted her hand gently, projecting my voice so the staff could hear. Mom, please. Don't worry about the cost. We will pay for whatever care you need. You have to recover. I had no intention of paying a dime of my own money. Before I left the farmhouse, I had quietly retrieved my mother's debit card from her purse. My brother's survivor benefits were sitting right there. I knew the code. It was Michael's birthday. She had idolized my brother. In my past life, I had drained my own savings to pay for her care, only for her to exclude me from her will, leaving everything to Sarah and the twins while destroying my name online. I walked out into the hallway and called Sarah. Sarah, Mom had a major neurological episode. It was during the argument with Chloe. You need to come to the hospital. Click. She hung up on me. Sarah wasn't going to come. She was done caring for a frail, demanding relative. When I finally returned to the room holding a tray of cafeteria food, I smiled warmly at my mother. With her one functioning arm, she swiped the tray out of my hands. Plastic bowls clattered against the wall, spilling everywhere. I wasn't upset. I had intentionally brought the cold hospital pudding, knowing she would push it away. When the nurses brought her prescribed blood pressure medication, she managed to grab the small plastic cup and threw the pills out the window. She struggled against the bed rails, mumbling loudly, "Unsafe." She trying to end me. Let me go. The other patients in the room looked at her with disapproval, and looked at me with deep pity. I just sniffled, quietly grabbing a broom to sweep up the mess, playing the role of the patient, devoted daughter. When her medication was thrown out, I just went back to the nurse's station and politely asked for more. Eventually, the tired doctor pulled me aside. "Miss Caroline, if the patient is going to be this resistant to treatment, you might want to consider alternative care arrangements or discharging her." I dropped to my knees right there in the hallway, clutching the doctor's coat. "Please," I sobbed. "She is my mother. She is all I have left. Her mind is just affected by the episode. I beg you. You have to save her. Do whatever it takes." The doctor, moved by my display of total devotion, sighed and agreed to a firmer treatment plan. Mild sedatives to keep her calm, followed by standard IV therapy. When my mother woke up groggy from the sedatives, she looked down and saw the IV line taped into the back of her hand, fluid dripping into her arm. Her eyes went wide with dread. She looked up at me, her gaze full of realization. You want me gone," she mumbled. I leaned over her bed, adjusting her pillows with care. "Oh Mom, don't be silly," I whispered quietly. "This isn't standard care. I had this special compound brought in for you. It is a concentrated synthetic formula. You have to take it 3 times a day." Synthetic formula 3 times a day. Every word triggered her deepest phobias. She became extremely agitated. She tried to pull the IV line out, shouting for me to get away, moving so frantically that the nurses had to step in and secure her safely. To ensure her privacy, I paid extra to move her to an individual room. Once again, she tried her old tactic. She managed to use her phone and posted a garbled video to her social page. "Daughter, harming me. Help." But the internet didn't rally to her side this time. There was no outrage against me. Instead, the comments were flooded with support for me. "Wait. Isn't this the mom from the Caring for Family vlog? She has completely lost touch with reality. Her daughter is literally spending everything to pay for those medical treatments, and she thinks it is harmful. How ungrateful." I was in the same building. The daughter is an absolute saint. The mom is impossible to deal with. I hadn't left anything to chance. On the very first day she was admitted, I started a social media account called Caring for Family. I documented my struggles, crying in the cafeteria, showing the marks on my arms from where she pushed me, filming her shouting at the staff while I begged her to accept care. The public didn't see a villain. They saw a hero. The comments shattered whatever remaining resolve my mother had. I sat by her bedside, casually eating a fresh apple, letting the crisp scent fill the room. She stared at me unmoving. During the day, I was the perfect weeping daughter for the camera, but at night, when the floor was dark and silent, I would lean in close to her ear. "I lost everything once, Mom," I whispered into the darkness. "And now you are losing everything. Every drop in that IV bag is your worst fear coming to life. You better stay awake. If you close your eyes, the treatments will just keep going." Her eyes shot open, wide and fearful. She knew. She finally knew. "Yes," I whispered, answering her unspoken dread. I came back to balance the scales. She was forced to lie there, immobilized, watching the clear fluid drip, 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 into her vein. In her mind, she was watching her worst fears come true, one synthetic drop at a time. She didn't sleep. She stayed awake for days, terrified that the moment she drifted off, her life would end. She pleaded with every doctor who walked into the room, "Stop her. She harm. In the bag, call someone." The doctors just looked at me with sympathetic smiles and suggested I look into specialized care facilities for her confusion. One afternoon I sat in the chair beside her bed, flipping through a magazine. "You know, Mom, Lily hasn't come to visit you once. I wonder if she holds a grudge against you." I smiled, observing the despair on her face. I was just waiting for the final moment. The final moment came when I stepped out of the room to grab a coffee from the cafeteria. When I returned, the hallway outside my mother's room was chaotic. A nurse was calling for assistance, and staff had gathered at the door. I pushed my way through to see Lily inside, being held by 2 security officers. She was moving wildly, shouting at the top of her lungs, her face contorted in anger. "Why do you get to carry on?" Lily yelled, knocking over a tray. "You ruined my life. You have no right to be here." She pointed a trembling finger at my mother, who was cowering in the bed, clutching her gown in terror. "It is her fault," Lily shouted to the bewildered staff. "She is the one. She didn't let my mom take me to a doctor. She caused my hearing loss. She forced me to live in that rotting farmhouse and lose everything. Why is she allowed to live peacefully?" Lily's voice broke into a heavy sob. She collapsed onto the floor, completely exhausted, burying her face in her hands. The security officers eventually led a crying Lily out of the building, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. I stood near the doorway, watching the scene unfold with quiet detachment. This was the exact question I had asked myself in my previous life, right before I took those pills. Why did my own mother destroy me? What did I do to deserve this? Now, Lily was the one asking it. The hospital staff, reviewing the security footage, later realized how tense it had been. Lily had slipped into the room while I was gone, confronted my mother, and had actually picked up a pillow, attempting to cover her face. Only my mother's frantic pressing of the call button, with her one functional hand, had alerted them. As I watched the authorities take Lily into custody for the disturbance, I felt a slight wave of indifference, not because she confronted her grandmother, but because her efforts were fruitless. After all, I was the one who had sent Lily an anonymous message that morning, saying, "I'll be out of the room grabbing lunch at noon. Grandma is all alone. She misses you." Following Lily's outburst, my mother's condition declined rapidly. The sheer terror of being confronted by her favorite grandchild broke whatever spirit she had left. She lost all motor ability. She could no longer speak, unable to form even broken words. The only thing she could do was follow me with her eyes, looking around the room in absolute panic. The doctors gently suggested it might be time to transition her to end-of-life care. I politely declined. There were still funds left in my brother's account, and as long as there were resources, the consequences would continue. I authorized the medical team to insert a nutrition tube directly into her stomach. Every day, I sat by her bed. I would take her prescribed medications, the very synthetic substances she believed were harmful, crush them into a powder right in front of her, and pour them into the tube funnel. I would watch her eyes widen in helpless dread as the liquid traveled down the plastic tube. Sometimes when I leaned in close to adjust her pillows, she would make a low sound in the back of her throat. It sounded vaguely like, "Sorry, Mom, sorry." I would just smile, wiping a fake tear from my eye. "It is okay, Mom. You don't have to thank me for taking care of you." She wasn't sorry for what she did to me. She was just terrified because she had finally realized that she was completely alone. Her daughter-in-law had abandoned her. One granddaughter was living a questionable lifestyle in Vegas who despised her, and the other had just tried to cover her face with a pillow. She was trapped in an incapacitated body, at the mercy of the daughter she had ruined in a past life. She had finally learned the truth. But it was far too late. Eventually, the inevitable happened. The final funds in my brother's account were used up for specialized medical expenses. With the funds exhausted, my mother's health declined into complete organ failure. She spent most of her days unconscious, her breathing shallow. Following a meeting with the medical team, I signed the comfort care agreements and authorized the removal of life-prolonging equipment. When the technician removed the oxygen equipment, my mother stirred briefly. The sudden lack of air created a final struggle. Her chest rose weakly. Her eyes opened, staring at the ceiling, her hand weakly moving on the sheets. Grasping for breath, I stood at the foot of the bed, my arms crossed, watching her pass. I didn't hold her hand. I didn't offer comforting words. I just watched as the monitor's slow sound faded, until it finally went silent. She stopped moving. Her eyes remained open, looking into nothingness. She was gone. Exactly 24 hours later. Like someone looking for a payout, Sarah reappeared. "Where is it?" Sarah demanded, cornering me in the hospital hallway right outside the billing office. Her eyes were wide, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. "Where is the rest of the money?" I slowly pushed her hands away from my coat. "What money, Sarah?" "Michael's survivor fund, the life insurance," she hissed, looking around nervously. "Your mother kept that money for years. Now that she is gone, that money belongs to me and my girls. Don't you dare try to keep it." I reached into my designer purse, pulled out a thick stack of itemized medical bills, and handed them to her. "The money is gone, Sarah. Every last cent went toward Mom's intensive care, the private room, the advanced treatments, and the specialists." Sarah snatched the papers, her eyes scanning the massive figures. She turned pale, her voice shaking. No, this insurance should have covered this. You can get this reimbursed. Where is the check?" I offered her a tight smile. I insisted on the absolute best treatments. Unfortunately, the insurance company deemed them experimental and refused coverage. It was all paid out of pocket. There is barely enough left in her account to cover a basic memorial service. Sarah stared at me, the reality sinking in. She had endured years of grueling farm labor, lost her suburban home, and sacrificed her career, all under the assumption that she would eventually receive a massive sum. Now, she had absolutely nothing. She dropped the papers on the floor, yelling angrily, and ran toward the elevators, desperately trying to call her bank to check the empty accounts. My mother's memorial was a quiet, modest gathering at a local parlor. It also provided the final act of this story. Lily, recently released from observation, sat in the back row, staring blankly at the wall, biting her fingernails. Suddenly, the doors of the parlor opened wide. Chloe walked in, wearing a tight black dress and dark sunglasses. But before she could even take a seat, an angry woman in a luxury suit walked in right behind her. The woman grabbed Chloe by her hair and pulled her backward, striking her across the face. "You little troublemaking girl," the woman shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "I let you into my home, and you ruined my marriage. I will end your career." Chloe, crying out in pain, tried to defend herself. The two women struggled in the middle of the aisle. In the chaos, they crashed into the display stand, holding my mother's framed photo. The heavy frame crashed against the floor, glass breaking everywhere. The sound of breaking glass didn't stop them. They continued to pull at each other's clothes and hair. As a security guard rushed in to pull Chloe away, she locked eyes with me, her face scratched. "Aunt Caroline, please help me." I stood near the front row, looking at her with total apathy. "You already caused your grandmother so much distress, Chloe," I said coolly, loud enough for the small group to hear. "Are you trying to give me a breakdown too?" I knew exactly who the angry woman was, because I was the one who had anonymously emailed her the photos of Chloe and her husband. As Chloe was led away crying out of the parlor, a strange laugh came from the back of the room. Lily had walked up to the front. She looked down at the shattered portrait of our mother, giggling uncontrollably. She stepped heavy boots directly onto my mother's photo, crushing the glass into the picture. She spat on it, laughing erratically, until Sarah finally managed to pull her away and lead her out to the car. When the room was finally empty, I slowly walked up to the ruined photo. I picked up a single white rose and dropped it onto the broken glass. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, my soul felt completely at peace. In the years following my mother's passing, the story of our family's downfall became a cautionary tale in my hometown. Everyone knew the story of the fanatical matriarch who drove her family into chaos. One granddaughter lost her hearing and her focus, frequently walking rural roads talking to herself. The other was shunned in Vegas, reduced to surviving on the absolute fringes of society. Sarah was last seen working the late shift at a rural gas station, her youth and ambition entirely drained away. As for me, I became a notable success. The Caring for Family social media account had gone viral. I was hailed as the ultimate devoted daughter, a woman who had sacrificed her time, her energy, and her peace to care for a difficult mother until her final days. My corporate leaders saw my dedication to family as a sign of strong character and promoted me to vice president of the firm. I bought a penthouse overlooking the Seattle skyline. I was thriving, peacefully moving forward from the past. One rainy evening, during a business trip to a less glamorous part of Nevada, I took a turn down a narrow alleyway behind a casino. A woman in a worn miniskirt stepped out from the shadows, grabbing the sleeve of a passing man. Her makeup was smeared, and she looked thin and tired. "Hey handsome," she murmured, her voice raspy. $100 for some company, come on." The man pushed her off. The woman immediately lowered her offer, her voice cracking with desperation. 50, please, just $50. I really need it." The man laughed coldly, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a motel door. As they turned, the woman glanced over the man's shoulder. Her eyes locked onto mine. She froze. The color drained entirely from her face. She quickly looked down, turning her face away in agonizing embarrassment, as the man pulled her into the dark room. I paused under the flickering neon sign. I thought about calling out her name, but then, I simply adjusted my silk scarf and kept walking. It was just an alleyway I had accidentally passed by. Nothing more. I stepped out onto the brightly lit avenue, got into a black car, and drove toward my bright, unburdened future.